Welcome to another episode of the Svarim Chatter podcast. I'm Naki Weinstein. This episode of the podcast is sponsored anonymously in appreciation of Svarim Chatter and in gratitude to Abie Rotenberg's music that has inspired and entertained generations. This episode of Svarim Chatter is also sponsored by Cedar Media Studios, a creative marketing agency that blends traditional storytelling with today's digital tools. Cedar Media specializes in helping businesses, authors, Svarim publishers, and organizations bring their work to the right audiences, whether that's through podcasts, online campaigns, or impactful marketing strategies that actually get results. They're experts at identifying who your audience really is and reaching them where they are with content that genuinely resonates. And I just want to say that Zevi Kaufman, who is the man behind Cedar Media Studios, is a great guy. He's a friend of mine, and it is always a pleasure working with him. He really understands the podcast space, ad placements, the whole world of creative marketing, Svarim, books, things. These are things that he's involved with. So thank you to Cedar Media Studios for sponsoring this week's episode and for helping so many projects in the Svarim world and beyond get the visibility and audience they deserve. Reach out to Cedar Media Studios for a discovery call. You can find their information in the show notes. To sponsor an episode or to support the podcast, please email me svarimchatter@gmail.com, or you can find the information and links in the show notes below. As I mentioned on a previous episode, I'm working on a series on the Early American Rabbinate and still looking for a few sponsors there, as well as for a number of other episodes and some mini-series. You can also find the link in the show notes to subscribe to the Svarim Chatter WhatsApp community where I post new books, book deals, new Svarim, and so on. Also, you can find the same type of information on the Svarim Chatter status. There's a link to that as well. And finally, you can please subscribe to the podcast, rate and review it on Apple. And with that, enjoy the episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Svarim Chatter podcast. On this episode of the podcast, I'm going to be joined by Abie Rotenberg, who is noted composer, singer, artist. But in this podcast, we'll be discussing as an author that he just published a new book, or sefer really, Rabbi Akiva, a study of the Tana, his Torah, and his times through the prism of Chazal, published with Art Scroll. And this is a follow-up on his first book published a number of years ago, and actually republished now in standard size. An Eliyahu Navi that was originally only published in a large size. Now it's in a standard size, more accessible. So this is two now books or / Svarim that he has published, and we'll be discussing the Tana, Rabbi Akiva, and what it was like to write a biography of a Tana. So thank you, Rabbi, for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
So let's sort of tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your background.
I was born in New York City. I grew up in Queens. I went through the Chafetz Chaim elementary school, high school based medrash system. I was privileged to study under Rav Henoch Leibowitz. After a number of years in Yeshiva Chafetz Chaim, I spent 2 years in Kollel in Eretz Yisrael. I studied under Rabbi Plachinsky. He was a grandson of the Alter from Slobodka, son-in-law of Rabbi Levine, and one of Israel's prominent and preeminent Talmidei Chachamim, and it was a privilege to get close to his family, and a lot of what I gained in learning was in those few years that I spent in Eretz Yisrael. So that's my Torah background, and Baruch Hashem, I'm an older man already, and have had chavrusas over the years, and spent time learning as much as, I shouldn't say as much as possible, but certainly put in some time in learning, and felt qualified with the help of all of today's Bekias aids to write on Eliyahu Navi in depth, as well as to write about Rabbi Akiva in depth.
Okay, so listeners are familiar with you probably as an artist, musical artist, but how do you come to writing biographies, essentially Torah-based biographies of, Eliyahu Navi and then a Tana and Rabbi Akiva? How does that happen? How did you become interested in deciding to do that?
Right. So I was looking for something to write about. I felt, I know that in music, I would work and try to write thematic songs that were uplifting and inspiring, not just the niggin itself where you take a pasuk, but in the Journey series, I tried to write something meaningful, inspirational, something that could work with a secular audience, a religious audience, meaningful songs. And I felt I could contribute as well in learning. And it popped into my head that someone like Eliyahu Navi is such a fascinating figure in history. And he is in scripture. There are 7 or 8 prakim in Malachim about him, as well as a post scriptural world that he lives in, because he lives forever. He's at a bris, he's at our Siddharim, he is going to be coming back and being Mavasa the Geula. And when I looked into it, I saw that there are so many Chazal, so many sections in the Gemara, in the Medrash that talk about him, that relate him to Psukim, that tell stories about him. So I felt that there certainly was sufficient material to write an entire volume about him, and it proved to be correct. I mean, it's not a short pamphlet; it's a full book. And after finishing Eliyahu, I wondered. I had such enjoyment and fulfillment from doing that. I wanted to do the same with another person of note, and someone whose life was fascinating and again filled with Chazal. And I found that to be the case with Rabbi Akiva, and easily matched in terms of the number of Chazal and aspects of his life that could be written about, and also filled a full book. And probably, if somebody was more talented than me, could probably fill 2 or 3 svarim with his Torah. But I think there's sufficient there to get a good picture of Rabbi Akiva from this volume.
Yeah, it's 500 pages, so it is definitely a big book. So is it a biography? I know there's something you discussed in the introduction. Is it even, when we discuss biography, quote unquote, in the classical sense, is that what this book is? Is this more of an intellectual biography? Is it more a collection of Chazal, either Rabbi Akiva's own sayings or sayings that Chazal say about Rabbi Akiva with explanations from Mefarshim? How would you define this sefer/book?
Well, I think, like I write in the introduction, that it's not a history book. It's not a story about Rabbi Akiva, but it contains much history. It talks about his times, because how do we understand the Chazal about Rabbi Akiva if we don't know the times he lived in? How do we understand his relationship to Bar Kokhba if we don't know what was going through his mind vis-a-vis Mashiach and the Churban, and what he believed in terms of the destiny of Klal Yisrael? So there are elements of history, there are elements of biography, but primarily my focus was to interpret and explain the Chazal, whether, like you said, it was about him or it was by him. So his famous statement, let's say, Kol ma da'avid Rahman al-Latav, everything Hashem does is for the good. So we discussed the issue. There is bad in the world. How can we say that there's always good? You're supposed to, Kashem shemavarchen ala tov, kach mavarchen ala ra. We certainly acknowledge that there is bad. So what did Rabbi Akiva mean? Looking at it in depth. He was a Talmud, by the way, of Nachum Ish Gamzu. Maybe many people are not aware of that, but he also studied for many years with the great Tana Nachum Ish Gamzu, and that he learned from his mentor, from his teacher, that one must have this attitude is something that he absorbed. So we go into detail on that. We talk about the famous saying of Rabbi Akiva that Hashem is metaher eschem. We sing that song, the famous song of Mi metaher eschem avinu shavashamayim. So there's so much depth to these sayings of Rabbi Akiva, and there's tremendous amount of depth in the stories that the Gemara and the Midrashim tell about him. The story with Rachel, the story with Bar Kokhba, the story with his Talmidim, the loss of his Talmidim. How did that happen? Where did it happen? When did it happen? So it is a combination of biography, but it really is focusing on understanding the Chazal.
Yeah, okay, and we'll discuss obviously some of that here, and not want to speak in absolutes, and certainly with Tanoim you can, but Rabbi Akiva is one of the most prominent Tanoim, especially to us, and so even just Sfira every year, everyone knows about Rabbi Akiva and the Talmidim, and all the kids come home learning about him. So just that alone, besides for anything else, there's once a year during the calendar every year that everyone's talking about Rabbi Akiva. So, but let's first start with, like you say, it's not a history book, but there's a history of Rabbi Akiva, the person, and Rabbi Akiva, the Tana, really the great Tana. And so let's give a brief outline of Rabbi Akiva's life and things. And some of this isn't clear, at 40 years, what was he? Did he not know anything till 40 years old? Did he know something? Where he met his wife? What that was like? Went off for 12 years and he came back another 12 years. And there's a lot going on. At Bar Kokhba, there's like a lot of different parts. His travels, there's so much. But I'll let you give a brief sketch at least, and we can dive into some parts maybe more in depth here.
Well, you've said a lot in that short paragraph. I mean, Rabbi Akiva, we all know he went to the Cheder with his son. That's what it says in Avos of Nosson. So he had a young child, and by the way, he had just married Rachel, Bas Kalba Savua. So apparently he had a child from a previous marriage. We do not know what his first wife's name was. We don't know how many children he had with her, but apparently he had a young son. And he went to Cheder. So there are nursery school songs that Rabbi Akiva didn't know the Aleph Beis, and that may not be true. He may very well have known the Aleph Beis. He certainly knew verses from Tanakh. He mentions verses. People talk to him, quoting certain verses from Tanakh. But again, somebody could know Tanakh, but if he did not know Torah Shebaal Peh, he is still called an Ama Aretz. He's still called an ignorant person. So these are very elusive questions, and we address these questions in the book, and we show we cite some opinions from different achronim, and we try to clarify the issue. But the main thing I would say about Rabbi Akiva, I say in the introduction, is that he is a study in contrast, because Rabbi Akiva was the most optimistic of people. He's the one who went to Har HaBayis and he laughed. He's the one who went to Rome and he laughed. He suffered tremendously at the end of his life. He was being tortured. And according to the Yerushalmi, while his soul was slipping away from his body, he laughed. And as he was able to accept it with joy. So on one hand, he had tremendous suffering in his life, tremendous heartbreak with the loss of his students. But he got back up and he found new ones. And he was always optimistic. And study in contrast, he was an ignorant person for 40 years of his life. And where did he become at the end of his life? The greatest leader, the Gadol Hador, not only of his generation, because he actually spanned 2 generations of Tanoim. He had extreme longevity. He lived to 120 years. And he took the Torah that he gained in the second third of his life, from 40 to 80, and he took it with him from 80 to 120, and he taught it to Klal Yisrael. So he is also known as the Nosein HaTorah, the giver of the Torah Shebaal Peh, and it's compared in many ways by many Meforshim to Moshe Rabbeinu. So it's just a fascinating life. And the anecdotes and the stories are endless. He traveled, like you mentioned, he traveled all over to give chizuk. He traveled all over to raise money. He traveled to strengthen our brethren wherever they were in those days. He went by boat. Chazal tell a story about his boat sinking and how he grabbed onto a piece of wood to survive. Can you imagine? He was in his 80s already, and he's shipwrecked in the ocean. And miraculously and providentially, he's able to survive and continue and lead Klal Yisrael for many more decades. I see you're leafing through.
I'm looking for what to ask you, because there's a lot of different things.
The best thing is to look at the table of contents, because the table.
There's so many places to go, because as you said, just starting off, there's, as you mentioned about the first 40 years, then there's his wife, and everybody knows the famous story with his wife, and then he comes home, and then she's, he hears her talking, and says, oh, another 12 years, and he goes back for another 12 years, and he comes like a 24,000 students. So, I mean, you can imagine, and that's something you go through, and that what that kind of means, to be away for 12 years, and he's away for 24 years from his wife, and what that means. We didn't talk about her, like you said, we know her name is Rachel, we know Bas Kalba Savua, we know, certain things about her and her family. We know all the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva dying. That's worth, discussing as well. That's something that everybody is familiar with. And then his famous 5 Talmidim that he has afterwards. I don't know if you wanted to talk about anything there. And then Rabbi Akiva, just his learning as well. Oisis Rabbi Akiva, we have Darshan Dol Oisis, we have Svarim Oisis Rabbi Akiva. So there's that. And you met just you kind of if
I can tell you that because it was focused study for me, and day in day out, I was dealing with Rabbi Akiva. Did this, and Rabbi Akiva went there, and Rabbi Akiva, and he had his relationship with Rabbi Yeshua and his relationship with Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, and these are fascinating stories within the story. And Baruch Hashem, I feel that whoever reads the book in its entirety will come away with several chidushim, with several novel and original interpretations. I'll give you one that I think is enlightening. Of course, the story of Rabbi Akiva going away for 12 years to study is understandable. First of all, he was not the only one who did that. The Gemara brings down the names of other Tanoim in those days who did that. It was unique. It certainly was not standard form that somebody would get married and leave his wife for the next 12 years. But it was not uncommon. There were other Tanoim who did that because, and the Maharsha explains, he says, those were the years when a person's strength in learning and koach was the greatest. And he would utilize those years, obviously with the blessing of his wife, and he could go off and study for 12 years. But Rabbi Akiva did that makes sense because he was catching up. He knew nothing. He had to obviously go and do something unique if he was going to grow into a great scholar. But the fact that he went back for another 12 years was unheard of. And the circumstances where he also felt it's time for me to come home. I shouldn't be any different than anybody else. How can my wife endure the poverty and the loneliness? I have to go back home. And we all know the story that he overheard her talking, and she said, if he would listen to me, he would know that I want him to go back for another 12 years. So I have a take on that they corresponded, that Rabbi Akiva and Rachel had corresponded before. And he said, should I come home? And she said, no, stay away. Continue learning. You have much to accomplish. For you, 12 years is not enough. Maybe it's the maximum for some other Tana who grew up, went to Cheder, went to Yeshiva, went to Beis Medrash for many, many years. But you missed the first 40 years of your life. You need more time. And especially, there's an amazing Yerushalmi which talks about how Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus had no dialogue. The first 12 years of his being in that yeshiva, the yeshiva of those two great Tanoim, Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer, only Rabbi Yeshua had dialogue with Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Eliezer was from Beis Shammai, and he did not really want to accept Rabbi Akiva into the yeshiva. He didn't think he was a candidate. And it wasn't until the 13th year that he went back, and then the dialogue started, and they became very close. And there are hundreds and hundreds of arguments in the Gemara between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. And I believe that he expressed this to his wife, and he told about his frustration not having a connection with Rabbi Eliezer. And she told him, stay longer, work on it. You have to become a Talmud of Rabbi Eliezer. You have to be able to talk to him and learning to grow. So when he overheard her, when he came back and he heard the conviction in her voice, it wasn't the first time that he heard that. It wasn't the first time that he experienced that. He knew she wanted him to stay. And that's why he turned around and went right back, because he felt it, he could hear it in her voice, and he turned back to go and spend another 12 years away from her. So that's just one nugget, one thought that is, I think, a chiddush. Ilu havetzayisli. Not that if he would listen to me now. Had he listened to me, he wouldn't have come home. Ilu havetzayisli. Had he listened to me, had he heeded my words, the words that and we know they communicated with each other. Rabbi Akiva sent her money. She sent him money. It was funny that she would cut her hair and sell it to support him in yeshiva. He would go out and collect wood and sell it to send her money back home so that she could support the children. So that's just one little nugget from the Sefer. But there are many.
And there's a lot. And what do you do, for example, when you come to, like I said, Rabbi Akiva with the Makom HaMikdash and the Churban, and he laughs, right? This is a famous, very famous Gemara, very famous Memra, and that Chazal say. So it
is a Gemara. I will tell you, Reb Nafi, that it is a Gemara that I do not know too many people who really understand it. It is a very, very difficult story. Most people understand it that he saw a fox, and we know that it says in Eicha al Har Tzion Sheshomeim Shualim Hilchuvo that there are going to be foxes running around. So he saw the fulfillment of the sad prediction of Yirmiyahu, and therefore he realized and recognized that if that prediction came true, certainly the other predictions of other Nevi'im will also come true, and that is really not true at all. He is not talking about Shual and Hilchubo. He's not talking about Yirmiyahu's Nevuah. He's talking about the Nevuah's Uriah. People don't know which Uriah this is and what his Nevuah was. So there's much, much to learn. And if somebody does have the book, I don't know if this is going to be aired before Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av's tonight, so I guess it's going to be well after Tisha B'Av. But I could say that if somebody has the book, you can read it on Perek Shmini, the 8th Perek. You could read on Tisha B'Av because it's all about the Churban and Rabbi Akiva's response and reaction to seeing a single fox, not Shualim. It says Shual Echad. Yotzei mibeis Kodshei HaKadoshim. He saw one fox. He and his colleagues saw one fox running out of the Kodesh HaKadosh.
And when you take something like that, do you, in the book, try to go through multiple opinions? Because obviously there's many different ways to learn what's going on there.
You take one approach. We take one approach. I do write in a footnote that there are other approaches, and I give some guidance where to find them. But it would be too difficult. But it's the approach that resonated with me, and I think answers most of the questions that people have on that amazing story.
As we said, there's many different famous expressions, many famous things that Rabbi Akiva said and learned. But one, I recently ran a series on the podcast about the 10 lost tribes, the Aseret HaShvatim. And Rabbi Akiva is famous for this, the Mishnah and Sanhedrin. Rabbi Akiva says, there's no more Aseret HaShvatim. They're not coming back. At least the face value, that's what he says. Rabbi Farshon otherwise. So what did you, in looking into Rabbi Akiva and Aseret HaShvatim, what did you come up with?
The Gemara itself says that this is out of character for Rabbi Akiva. Shavke Rabbi Akiva l'chasidusei. Rabbi Akiva abandoned his kindness and his attitude of Avas Yisrael, which permeates every day of his life and every moment and every step that he took. So it is perplexing. I can tell you over very quickly the Radvaz. The Radvaz says an amazing thing, and it's important for people to know this, that there's a verse in Yecheskel that tells about La'asid Lavo in the future, when after Mashiach comes, the 12 tribes are going to be repatriated and they're going to have their land, and the Nafla will go back to the Shneimesar Shvatim. So how could Rabbi Akiva say that we're not going to have 10 Shvatim if we're going to be giving back land to 12 Shvatim? So the Radvaz explains, and he says that Rabbi Akiva was talking about the people, the Aseret HaShvatim, the people who were exiled from the northern kingdom of Eretz Yisrael, from Malchus Yisrael. But while they were members of the 10 tribes who were exiled, they were also members of the 10 tribes who lived in Yerushalayim and lived in the southern kingdom. You had people from Reuven, Shimon, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zavulun. You had from all the Shvatim. First of all, there were the Mamados, which were represented by the different tribes. And even though it was illegal for many of these people to be in the southern kingdom, but they went anyway, and there were people living in Yerushalayim. So when the Aseret HaShvatim were exiled, it didn't mean they all were exiled. And the people who were exiled later, with Yehuda and Binyamin, they still exist. Are you a Kohen or a Levi? Reb Nachi, are you a Kohen or a Levi?
Yes, a Levi.
You're a Levi, okay, but a regular Yisrael that you meet on the street, he said, I'm from Yehuda. Not necessarily true. He may be from Binyamin, he may be from Yehuda, being exiled from, again, the southern kingdom, but he may be from Ephraim, he may be from Manasseh, he may be from Reuven or Gad or Zevulun. We don't know. And Eliyahu Hanavi, when he comes, will obviously identify who's from who, and those people will get their nachla back because they are descendants. Rabbi Akiva was only saying that the people from the Aseret HaShvatim who were nigla from the northern kingdom are not coming back. And the reason is because they basically left Israel, they went to their new lands, and they immediately embraced the culture and the language and the mores and in some cases the avodah zarah of the lands that they went to, and they were lost. And I posit that Rabbi Akiva also traveled to those places, and he saw how far they had fallen and how distant they were from any semblance of Yiddishkeit, and that's one of the reasons he said that they cannot possibly be recovered.
It's also worth mentioning here, just as a side point, that Shevet Shimon Shevet Shimon was located in the south anyways. They weren't located in the north. So as it is, the whole question of who the 10 Shvatim are, this is something that's kind of problematic when I did the series. And the Marsha in Saita, actually, the Marsha on Daf Membeis even says this, that Shevet Shimon came back from Galus Bavel, and they were not one of the 10 tribes anyways. They lived in middle of Yehuda, so it kind of doesn't make sense the other way. So probably today you ask everyone, they say, oh, Yehuda, Binyamin, and Levi, but most probably also people are from Shimon, if you would look, and if you go. So that's just a separate side point, just worth mentioning here, that sometimes people don't realize.
Yes, what the Museum might really have been 9 tribes as opposed to 10 tribes for the most part. But it was still
it says 10.
Because the dominating the dominant city was Yerushalayim, which was Yehuda and Binyamin.
It's also possible because part of Levi was there, so you consider that. I mean,
the Kohanim was serving in the Beis Hamikdash, and the Leviim was serving in the Beis Hamikdash. Yes.
Well, listen, I'm not here to say the answer, but I can just say that Marsha definitely says others. And if you look where Shimon is located, he's in the middle of Yehuda, so he is in the southern. He's in the kingdom of Yehuda. So it really wouldn't. It doesn't. It's hard to say. But the in the Nach it says Eser Kroyim, so it makes it sound like there was. It says it was 10. So just being ma'or here, there's something that came up in the series, so worth mentioning. Now, another part of Rabbi Akiva's life, and you alluded to this, you mentioned this earlier, this is worth discussing, and about the revolt against tyranny. This is chapter 11 in your book about the Bar Kokhba, what happened with Bar Kokhba. And as you say, just to read, the writer approaches the subject matter contained in this chapter with trepidation. And you go on and you say that there's really complicated, and Rabbi Akiva was a Galadar, and he was behind Bar Kokhba, and this is not, and you write that there's many broadly divergent ways, and those studies' conclusions reflect hashkafic opinions that vary from the right to the left of Torah Juri. And you actually have an appendix talking about different things from the right to the left. So if you could say a little bit about Bar Kokhba, Rabbi Akiva's role in it, and what not what your opinion is, but what you came up in your research and researching the different opinions on what happened there with Rabbi Akiva and Bar Kokhba.
Right. So the truth is the Rambam, if we take the approach of the Rambam, and he is the one who wrote that Bar Kokhba was Nosei Kelev Shel Bar Kokhba. Nosei Kelev, we do not find those words, and the Beis Yosef actually is surprised. He says, where did the Rambam find this? It's not anywhere in Shas, it's not anywhere in the Medrash that he actually was an armor bearer. An armor bearer means he carried his kelim. He went out into battle, or at least towards the front where there was going to be a battle, and he wanted to show empathy with the fighting that was going on and with the soldiers that were going out to war. So there's no question that's what Nosei Kelev means. There happens to be a manuscript from a Yemenite Talmud that has those words somewhere, I think in Sanhedrin, where it says Nosei Kelev. So it's very possible that the Rambam got that from a Gemara, from a manuscript that he had. And it seems like that because the Rambam did not just make things up. I mean, so the Rambam writes that all of Klal Yisrael, all of the Rabbanim supported Bar Kokhba. But the reason they supported him is because it wasn't a whimsical war against Rome. They always tried to settle the differences with the occupying power diplomatically. But Adrianus Caesar, and we say, may his bones be crushed, was so antagonistic to Klal Yisrael. He outlawed bris milah. He outlawed Shabbos. He outlawed mikveh for women. And the Marsha goes into that detail about how he wanted to destroy the identity of Klal Yisrael. Those are all osos. Those are the oisios that we use, that we have. And that's when they revolted. And Bar Kokhba was a Talmud of Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva appreciated his qualities. He was a great, great man, a great scholar. He was a humble man. He was a mighty warrior. He had the attributes that Yeshayahu Hanavi says and describes for Mashiach. So that is why Rabbi Akiva felt, as he did, that this man qualifies. As well as, it's very important to note that Rabbi Akiva also believed that the Golus Sheni, the Golus Edom, was going to be shorter than Golus Bavel. Golus Bavel was 70 years. Rabbi Akiva, there's a Gemara where he argues with Rav Nosson, and he explains a pasuk in Chagai, Od Achas Ma'ati, that pasuk is saying that the Golus of Edom will be shorter than the Golus of Bavel. So if you can imagine that, they are 50 to 60 years after the Churban Bayis. And he knows we're slowly approaching the 70 years that happened for Golus Bavel. And Rabbi Akiva's opinion was that Golus Edom was going to be shorter than Golus Bavel. So certainly Rabbi Akiva, when he saw a man with the courage and the honesty and the humility of Bar Kokhba, he was convinced that this was the Geula. Fascinating. And he announced it. And you could imagine the joy that went on in Klal Yisrael. The Gadol Ador of Chaim Kanievsky announces Moshiach is here. We have to put ourselves in our contemporary shoes and recognize what it was. It's just fascinating story in our history. And it's a mitzvah to learn it and to understand it and what went on. And hopefully the book captures the events in a clear and concise way, but it's inspiring stuff.
I also should go back for a second to that Seres HaShvatim, even though not in this context. Rabbi Akiva with Turnus Rufus, I think, says about Sambati and Yechiach, right? Isn't there Rabbi Akiva that tells him that?
It could be. I don't have anything about this.
I'm trying to remember if that's Rabbi Akiva.
As much as there is in the book, there's so much I'm sure that's still missing. I didn't cover every chazal or every single story about Rabbi Akiva, but I cover a lot.
So after Bar Kokhba, then we end up with this is the Rabbi Akiva. Then is
after Bar Kokhba, it got worse. As bad as Bar Kokhba was, as bad as the Churban Beitar was, close to 1 million people were killed. As bad as that was, it only got worse afterwards. It's called the Dor Ashmad, where they outlawed Torah, they outlawed anything to do with Yiddishkeit. The remnant in Eretz Yisrael was browbeaten and downtrodden and barely able to breathe. And what did Rabbi Akiva do? Makil Kihilos Barabin. He went and he started teaching in public, defying the government, because he said we cannot live without it. The story of the fox, the famous story. He was amazing. He was such a koach, he had so much strength. He was a powerhouse. He was I'm not sure what the word is in English, but it was impossible to push him down. He would rise up again.
So he's incarcerated. We know after this he's incarcerated in Rabbi Akiva, and you have a whole chapter of Rabbi Akiva in prison before we get to him being killed at Kiddush Hashem, and one of the maybe the most famous deaths of Kiddush Hashem.
Maybe the most famous Kiddush Hashem in Jewish history. Yeah. I write that. I think it's the most famous. I said the only thing that perhaps rivals it is Chana and her 7 sons. That amazing story as well. But even that, and certainly it's not even known for sure who she was, if it was in the times of the Yevanim, or if it was the times of the Romans. There's not 100% clarity. Rabbi Akiva's story is probably the most compelling and well-known story of Kiddush Hashem.
And listen, to something that it comes up as Sarug Malchus. We say it in Arze Levon and Adirei Torah. So we say it on Yom Kippur. We say it on Tisha B'Av. It comes up every year. You read it. It's very moving. So everyone is familiar with it, I think, in that sense. But I mean, there's the other Sarug Malchus. I think Rabbi Akiva is more famous than the other, I think. And that's something that
I'll say that the Rabbi Shua ben Levi asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu for a glimpse of heaven. He asked him for his famous Gemara. He asked him for a glimpse of heaven. And Hashem said, okay. Nobody else really knows what's going on up there. We certainly don't know. We don't know what's going on. But Yeshua ben Levi got a glimpse. And it says that when he went up there, he saw 7 levels. And he said in the highest level is Rabbi Akiva v'chaveiro. Rabbi Akiva and his comrades. Rabbi Akiva and the other 9 Asara Harugei Malchus. So not only is it noteworthy that they were on top of the heap in Olam Haba, but the Asara Harugei Malchus are called Rabbi Akiva v'chaveiro. So what the significance of that is, I'm not bold enough to say. In particular that his misa was more, more chashuv or meaningful than anybody else's, but certainly it's enlightening that because he was the greatest, he was the most well known of all those Tanoim. He was the leader. He was the Nosei Natar Shabbat.
You discussed in the book, and when is there? Do we know when Rabbi Akiva's yard site is?
I believe it was Yom Kippur. It's the famous. It was the Or Zarua, who was also similar to Rabbi Akiva. The Or Zarua was fascinated by letters and by Ois, and he has an introduction to his volume, his halachic work, where he goes into certain letters, and he's similar to Oisius to Rabbi Akiva. And he said he had a revelation that he saw the word Or Zarua Latzadik Yisrael Simcha. If you look at the Sof Osios of Or Zarua, it's Rabbi Akiva with a hey, by the way.
You have to bring us a raya that this is a proof, raya la'alocha, even that it's supposed to be with a hey. It's a shayla, I know.
Yes, he said that you can prove from it that Akiva should be with a hey, but he was so excited about discovering that he named his work Or Zarua, and perhaps some people suggest that's the reason we say it on Yom Kippur by Kol Nidre, because it's the yard site of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva passed away, I believe, on Yom Kippur. So on his Matzeva, the person who wrote his Matzeva said Erev Yom Kippur, but I think the true date of his yard site is Yom Kippur.
Right. So there's otherwise it would be Erev Yom Kippur, like you're saying, and then you put pictures in the book.
I have a problem with it being Erev Yom Kippur because the Gemara says that the Medrash tells us that Eliyahu Hanavi and Rabbi Yeshua Agarsi buried him. Eliyahu came to Rabbi Yeshua Agarsi. He said, "Your master has died in prison." And the two of them go to the prison and they take him out of the prison and they bury him that night. If his Misa was on Erev Yom Kippur, that means they would have carried him on Yom Kippur, which would be usher to do. And Eliyahu Hanavi, when he comes to earth, has to keep all the mitzvahs. He has to keep Tumah. He has to keep Tara. Rabbi Yeshua Agarsi said, "How could you carry him? Aren't you a Kohen?" So obviously it could not have been the night of Yom Kippur because they could not have carried him to his resting place from the prison had it been Yom Kippur. Even a Meis Mitzvah you're not allowed to be Mechal Shabbos or Yom Tov to bury him. You'd have to wait till after. So if he died on Yom Kippur, it was Matzah Yom Kippur that they carried him to his resting place.
And so this is really just scratching the surface. As I said, the book is 500 pages, and you really go through not all, but a lot of the memories and expressions of Rabbi Akiva from Gemara, Medrash, etc., all throughout Chazal, and also you go through a lot of Mefarshim, as you say. Even then, you're only taking a lot of times one Mahalach. So there's really a lot to go through, a lot to talk about Rabbi Akiva, but. What was it like for you? You mentioned the Bikias tools of today, but what is it like to research and to write the book? You have to understand, first you have to find the Makairis and find the Mefarshim on and go through it. How did you go about finding the sources and finding the expressions that Rabbi Akiva said? And then there's a lot of moving parts here. What was it like to put this sefer really together?
Yeah, so there are some wonderful, obviously Torah-based history books. There's Toldos Tanaim V'Amoraim by Rav Aaron Heyman, and there's my uncle Rav Shlomo Rotenberg Toldos Hamolam, and obviously Doros Harishonim, and there are other likutim about Rabbi Akiva, and like you even before the show, even before you showed me a book that has all the different Chazal about Rabbi. It was easy to find the Chazal. So to make a list of Chazal that discuss Rabbi Akiva or his Torah was not difficult at all to find. The question is what to choose, what to focus on, because like you said, I probably could do another book about Rabbi Akiva if I were to cover everything. But I felt that these were the main ones. These were the most famous. But getting to the bottom of what really happened or what shot is in the Chazal was not easy. That took a lot of time. There were days I could do maybe one or two Chazal a day if they were simple and easy, and then other Chazal took 2 or 3 weeks or 4 weeks just to figure out and understand what they were all about. And I had to learn a lot of history as well. I had to go through Doros Harishonim, and I had to Baruch Hashem. There are a lot of books in English as well. That there's the Art series and history series, and getting a sense of the surroundings and the surrounding background to what happened in his life really made a big impact on understanding those Chazal.
Yeah, when it comes to Bar Kokhba, I mean, you mentioned a lot of the Roman historians. I mean, there's a lot of Roman history there, especially
There
with
is.
the time that
There
he
is.
lived. We know of
Mm.
a lot of what happened.
Sure.
So I mean,
Mm.
we have sources for that. What again, outside of Chazal, obviously the book is focused on Chazal, but you're saying you wanted to learn other stuff also about the context and the time Rabbi Akiva lived. So when it comes to Mefarshim, explaining the Chazal, how did you find those Mefarshim? And are there certain Mefarshim in particular that you gravitated towards more than others?
That's a very, very good question. It was more a matter of a Mefaresh giving something that resonated with me. If I read him, even if it was the Marsha, if I couldn't understand it or feel that I could relate to it, I didn't mention the Marsha's approach. I might mention in a footnote that the Marsha has a different approach. But if it was the Ben Yoyada, if it was the Aruch Laner, if it was another. Obviously, if it was a Rishon, it had more weight to it. It had more credence to it. Very often, I found Rishonim who commented on aspects that on some of these questions, and then I would gravitate to the Rishon over the Achron if that was the case. Like the Ravaz I mentioned before, there's an amazing Taj Bates in the question of Rabbi Akiva at Har Abayis, that without that Taj Bates, it's almost impossible to understand the events. So those were the things I gravitated to because they resonated with me, and ultimately I had to feel comfortable with the scenarios that I paint in the book as having been what happened.
What's your your impression, your takeaway of Rabbi Akiva? Is there one kind of view in your mind now of Rabbi Akiva, or it's impossible to say?
It's admiration and awe. His life was awe-inspiring. Moshe Rabbeinu said about him, "Why are you giving the Torah with me?" Just that question, just that Moshe Rabbeinu should ask the Ribono Shel Olam, the Master of the world, our Creator, up in Shammai. He said, "What are you doing? Why me? Why are you giving it to me? Give it through him. He's so impressive. He's so Kadosh Baruch Hu told him. He said, "Shtok, kach olah b'machshava. This is what I want to do. I want you to be the nosei naTorah shebichsav. I want you to be the lawgiver for Klal Yisrael." He didn't answer him. He doesn't give him a reason, right? We go into the book that it wasn't that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was being dismissive. There's a famous Shla HaKadosh on that. Kach olah b'machshava. There's a beautiful shot on that. But awe, inspiration, and just, I hope anybody who walks away from the book will say, "Wow, I thought I understood Rabbi Akiva. I thought I knew who he was. I thought I had a good handle on his greatness." And hopefully they will come away with much more, many deeper levels of awe and inspiration of this amazing, amazing time. That's my hope. What else can somebody hope for when they write a sefer? That, as well as the genius and the depth of the Torah itself that he generated, and that is in Chazal about him and his times. It's amazingly deep. It's wonderfully deep. So it's a combination of, hopefully, the Torah that somebody will learn in the sefer will be inspiring, as well as the life of this man will be inspiring.
So the book is geared towards, what would you say, a general audience? Would you say it's geared towards someone that wants to just read some sort of like an intellectual biography? Is it geared towards someone that wants to learn more about Rabbi Akiva from the Torah perspective?
That's a wonderful question. So I'm very careful the book is there for scholar as well as for layman. The scholar, every Chazal is brought down both in Hebrew and it's translated into English. So if somebody wants to read, if somebody's a Talmud Chacham, if somebody's a scholar, somebody knows how to learn, wants to see the Lashon of Chazal, it's there. We didn't just translate the Chazal into English, which could very well be, jaded or influenced by whatever. So they can look at the Chazal and see if we've interpreted correctly. But for somebody who isn't that familiar with how to read a Chazal, it's translated and it's explained, it's elucidated. Everything that is in the book that is Hebrew is translated, and perhaps once a word is established, we will use that Hebrew word transliterated, but we explain what it is, and hope, like we talk about Ananei Akava. Rabbi Akiva believed that we sit in a sukkah because they built actual sukkahs. So to me, that was always a very troubling position. You know, we all sit in a sukkah and we talk about the clouds and how magnificent they were and how they protected us. And why would we bother to build a sukkah just because so that was always a perplexing argument in Shas for me. And I there's a whole chapter devoted to it, a very complex chapter. So I think the Talmud Chacham will come away with knowledge and growth and chidushim and many new novel ideas. But again, someone who's lay, who spends the time and concentration to read it, not just read it, but to study it, I think they'll come away with great inspiration and the beauty of Torah, as well as everybody will walk away with a greater appreciation for Rabbi Akiva. But 100%, it's not a casual book to read on the beach. You know what I'm saying? You don't read it at the lake. It's something you sit down to study and you learn and take out a Gemara to see what Rashi says or what the Ramban says. Somebody should, don't just take my word for it. I'm happy for people to go look at a sugya and to go see what the Gemara in Sukkah says about the Rebbe Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva, about Sukkah's Mamish and Aran Yaakov. Hopefully it'll generate some Pilpul Chaverim and Rizcha D'Oraisa in those areas.
So I do have to ask you a music question here at the end of the podcast. The First Journeys has a song, Rabbi Akiva. Is there any connection there? Well,
it means that as a young man, I was in my early 30s then when I wrote the First Journeys album, that it was he was a personality that resonated with me, and everybody admires Rabbi Akiva. I mean, like you said, as school children learn about him, they sing songs about him, and I thought it a theme that would be inspirational to people. It's not, from one of the more famous Journey songs, but it is a sweet song. Nachum Siegel told me recently he loves to play that song every once in a while because he's a big fan of Rabbi Akiva. So Ellie Kranzler did a wonderful job singing it, and it's a sweet folk style song. But obviously, it shows that he was on my mind, much younger when I was much younger. And again, after doing Eliyahu Hanavi, when I looked for someone to write about, I guess it was natural that I would gravitate towards Rabbi Akiva.
So, as you said earlier, you wrote the first book. The first sefer you wrote was Eliyahu Hanavi, which I'll link to in the show's notes. Then you wrote Rabbi Akiva, now I'll link to in the show's notes. And the Eliyahu Hanavi, so it was a large size, now it's in standard size, so I'll link to that and Rabbi Akiva. You also wrote another book worth mentioning here. You wrote a book a number of years ago. I remember reading this, The Season of Pepsi Myers. So this was kind of a baseball Kiruv type of book. I don't know if you want to just say something about it, just to the listener, what that is.
I will tell you that I was already working on Eliyahu Hanavi. I was working on it for a number of years. Eliyahu Hanavi took many years to write. I was working. I had a regular day job. It was not. Rabbi Akiva took a little bit less time because I had already retired from my day job. I had more time, especially the last 2 years after Journeys 5 came out, which I had to take off some time for that from Rabbi Akiva. But when I went back to Rabbi Akiva after Journeys 5 came out, I was able to devote a lot of time every day to Rabbi Akiva. But when I was doing Eliyahu Hanavi, I was maybe halfway through the book. I'm walking to shul one Shabbos, and this idea of writing a story about a non-religious Jewish phenom who could play baseball better than anybody else and ends up being drafted by the Yankees and comes to New York and ends up living next door to a rabbi who was involved in Kiruv, and his life changes and he and his family learn about Yiddishkeit. So that idea popped into my head on the way to shul. And that next day, I put Eliyahu Hanavi aside, and I said to myself that this is an ace lasos, because you have hopefully people who will read this book and come back to Yiddishkeit, and there's obviously a crisis among Klal Yisrael where so many people are either unaware or unhappy and moving away from Yiddishkeit. So I worked full time on that book for a year. And I'm very proud of it. It's filled with hashkafa. But in today's day and age, whereas maybe 100, 200 years ago, Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch could write the 19 letters and a young man would be focused and interested and mature enough to want to read it intellectually and be motivated by it. In today's day and age, you need something else to draw in the reader. And I thought baseball would be a very, very good way to do it. An exciting, compelling baseball story where the hashkafa is done more subliminally, and we sneak the hashkafa in through osmosis more so than in the than directly. And Baruch Hashem, quite a few books have been sold. And anybody listening to your podcast, if you have a neighbor, if you have a friend at work, if you have an associate who doesn't know about Yiddishkeit, but enjoys sports, knows about baseball, it could be a man, could be a woman, could be a boy, it could be a girl, a young adult, doesn't matter. Get them a copy of The Season of Pepsi Myers and let them read it. They'll enjoy the story. The baseball story is compelling, but within it, we present the Torah hashkafa of life.
Yeah, it's about 250 pages on Amazon, $14.99. I'll put it in the link in the show's notes. And I listen, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it as a baseball fan. I actually don't read many sports books, but I saw that. I said, oh, it's interesting angle, baseball angle, from angle. So I remember reading it a couple of years ago when it came out. Well, like 10 years ago almost by now. And so 19 years ago. So
2015.
That was an enjoyable book. So at this point, are you, you mentioned now you did that book, you did Eliyahu Navi, you did Rabbi Akiva. Are you working on another book? And then, like you mentioned, you put out Journeys 5, came out a number of years ago. And when's the next Marvelous Midos machine? How many times I listen to that? My kids listen to that. That's what we want. Where's more of that? But yeah.
Hi, Alavai. Give me a bracha. I should be able to continue to have ideas. The Rebbe Shalom's been very good to me. Thank him all the time. I don't know why he chose me to be a shliach for some of these ideas, but he did. And it's been a bracha for me to be able to bring out these ideas. And hopefully this sefer will be well received, and many people will get inspiration from it. And that's all anyone can ask, when you come out with something. And hopefully it's received well. But it's a serious work. And if somebody is looking for, like I said, a storybook, that's not where to go. But if they're looking to put some effort into understanding Rabbi Akiva better, it's a great place to start. But it's also not the place to end. People should take what they've learned from the Sefer and take it further and do their own research and their own learning. And through that, Lahagdol Torah Lahadira Mitzvah Hashem.
Okay, so you should definitely be zeicha to write many more svarim and more music for everybody, and you should. And thank you very much for joining me. And again, I'll link to the books in the show's notes. Anyone interested can purchase and check them out.
All the best.
Take care.
Kol tov.